can. But without further ado, I'd like to get to our last panel, which is one case study, but with three different experts speaking on different aspects of after the genocide in Rwanda. We are very fortunate to have two of our speakers here in the room with us and one speaker online. So we're going to have one presentation live, then we're going to go online, and then we're going to come back into the room. And hopefully we'll have questions from both our online and our in-person audience. So the three presenters on this case study of After the Genocide in Rwanda are Jolene Chu, Odette Murara, and Anna Marko. And without further, and I think Jolene and Anna, you're going to come up to the podium. So Jolene, I welcome you to come up and present your findings.
Thank you. It's very impressive to be here and see all that GRAD is doing. It's just amazing. So if we can work this well, I think we all agree that we could basically say in post-conflict societies that there are three very key, very complex, complicated, difficult processes: recovery of psychic wounds, the reconciliation of individual, family, and social ties, and the reconstruction of social bonds of society as a whole. Not loud enough? Okay, thank you. And this presentation suggests that a really important lubricant of those three processes is forgiveness. Oops. Leading forgiveness theorist, Robert Enright and his colleague have said, we equate the search for ways to forgive to the search for a way to cure cancer. And they go on to state, those who seek a cure for cancer are working to end human suffering on a global scale, but those who pursue ways to forgive are striving to end deep human misery. And so today we're just going to have a high-level view of this concept of forgiveness, originally a religious concept, but in the last 25 or 30 years studied quite deeply by psychologists, mostly some sociologists. And there's no one consensus on what forgiveness means. For instance, is it intrapersonal? I'm going to let go so I feel better, sort of a therapeutic forgiveness. Is it interpersonal, where you let bygones be bygones? But then what happens if the perpetrator's not present? It's dead, or you don't know who it is, or they don't ask for forgiveness? Can there be vicarious forgiveness, where I can forgive somebody that for somebody else? This is another thing in mass violence. And then there are two other concepts that we'll be talking about. One of them is divine forgiveness, this religious forgiveness, but psychologists also now use this as a measure of the psychosocial state of a person. And then we're going to talk about self-forgiveness. This one's a little controversial. It almost sounds offensive that someone who commits genocide, for instance, could forgive themselves. So we'll get into that. The absence of forgiveness, unforgiveness, or some call it grudge theory, has a whole host of negative psychic outcomes. It predicts trauma, depression, suicidal ideation, negative rumination, and of course, on a higher societal level, it predicts recurring violence. And yet there are life situations where therapists, counselors say that unforgiveness actually can be appropriate. We won't get into that today. But just to explain that the data for this presentation comes from a nationwide study that was done in Rwanda of the Jehovah's Witness community. This was undertaken by the National Office of Jehovah's Witnesses in Kigali and the world headquarters where I work at the academic division. and it was approved as we know that all research, genocide-related research, has to be approved by 2 agencies of the Rwandan government. So just, I'm going to flip through this quickly. We had an academic committee, just go back here, including 3 genocide survivors, 2 Rwandan survivors, and 1 child Holocaust survivor, as well as a couple others that have guided us through. Because this is internal research, Jehovah's Witnesses studying research, so it was important to us to have non-witness academics kind of overseeing the process. If you want anyone here who's interested in quantitative research, I can tell you later about some of the details of the study design. I would mention that if any of you are planning field work in your studies, we used an online platform called Kobo Toolbox to conduct the survey. It was developed by the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, particularly for quantitative research in difficult fields. So we'd be glad to tell you more about that. So our very modest expectation was a 25% response rate. We actually got over 50%, despite the fact that this is 70% rural population. There's quite a bit of digital illiteracy and lack of access. So we have a large sample of 13,700 almost, with a representative rural urban distribution. And here you can see who we have in the sample. 2/3 went through the genocide 30 years ago, either as minors or adults. 1/3 were outside of Rwanda or born afterwards. And there's the gender divide and also the age distribution, pretty reflective of Rwandan population as a whole. These are the main variables in quite a long survey. It took over an hour for people to take on average. They looked at religious factors, their own religious biography, psychosocial and pro-social factors, also the genocide situation, lifetime trauma events, and family composition, and the transgenerational communication of the genocide history. It's recognized that this is a site that sort of makes or breaks the next generation's view of genocide history. So those are the things we looked at. Today we'll just be covering very briefly forgiveness, along with some possible correlated variables. Okay, so just a word on our population. The witnesses in 1994 were about 2,500. 400 were killed. That's 16%, a rather large proportion. Part of the reason is, just to make clear, they were not targeted as a religious group in the genocide, but because it is a religion that practices worldwide a politically neutral and a nonviolent ethic. They're conscientious objectors, and that kind of position in a genocidal situation is, of course, fatal. And so many were killed either for refusing to harm or for harboring others. And this is something we wanted to look at as part of our study. After the genocide, within 2 years, the population doubled, despite the losses. And today it's 1,000% what it was 30 years ago. So we also wanted to look at those approximately 90% who became witnesses after the genocide. Who were they? Why did they become witnesses? Where did they come from? What is their past experience? So we had a difficult time, as I think most genocide researchers do, categorizing people. Actually, you can't. We used to say perpetrator, victim, bystander. It doesn't work, because in 100 days of chaos, lots of things happen. Crazy things happen, and people may, let's say, hide a family of 10 and then go out on a night patrol and kill somebody because they want to throw suspicion off of who they're protecting at home. It's messy. So we had some actually challenging ways to get at the data, because you can't put people in a box. And so the congregations in Rwanda today of Jehovah's Witnesses, we wanted to look at those same 3 steps: the recovery, the reconciliation, and the reconstruction, to see what's happening in these very mixed congregations who have, people in all these categories. This is the way we basically kind of had people tick boxes, what they had been through, whether they refused to harm, whether they tried to help, whether they were targeted either for, we couldn't ask about ethnicity, but targeted for harm or faced harm for other reasons. At the bottom, we had a crucial box that is, were you imprisoned for genocide crimes? So this is a matter of public record. So we felt like we could ask that question. We didn't go any further, but this was the question that we were allowed to ask. So in our sample, we have 126 who checked that box. There are 13 women among them, and 6 were Jehovah's Witnesses at the time. The rest became witnesses afterwards. So here, let's get to forgiveness a little bit to talk about the way we measured. I apologize if these are kind of small, so I'll try to help you out with the items there. So we looked at trait forgiveness. There's a couple different kinds of forgiveness. One is situational, where someone might come up to you and say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? That's what they call, it's a one-time deal. But what we thought would be more meaningful is to measure trait forgiveness, that this is over a period of time, a person's life pattern and inclination. So the questions were geared that way. So the first 5 where you see the gold lines, that means the respondents disagreed with the statement. And they were statements like this: if somebody treats me badly, I treat him or her the same way. Or I resent, even after I forgive, I still resent. I feel bitter about my relationships. If people didn't agree, that's not me, then they would, you see the gold responses there. The blue signifies that they agree. Yes, this is who I am. This is true of me. And so those were questions about, I can forgive a friend for almost anything. I usually forgive and forget. I can give someone even if they don't feel guilty. And the last one is, I am a forgiving person. And you see this kind of broad acceptance of that. We realize this is a religious group, and that is the norm, as it is in many religious belief systems. Is it optimism? Well, we're not there to judge that, but this is how people see themselves. Next, a quick look at divine forgiveness. And this is where gender starts entering the picture, because women are generally more religious than men. We'll see when we match up the figures. The first 3 are, God forgives, God's willing to forgive me if I ask. And I can ask to be forgiven. The next 2 are interesting. We're still in the bottom blue ones. It's knowing God forgives me helps me to forgive others and helps me to do better. So this is where they're taking the belief or the feeling and translating it into the actions. And the next gold line there says, no matter what I do, God forgives me. And you notice there's disagreement with that statement. And that actually affords with the teaching, at least in the Jehovah's Witness tradition, that repentance is necessary. It's not going to be a blanket, God forgives all. So you see there that reflected in the responses. And the bottom 2 say, what I've done is too serious for God to forgive. And there you have some disagreement with that statement. But this is the interesting one. Now, self-forgiveness does not mean self-exoneration. Absolutely not. It means one recognizes and admits harm, realizes what the harm has done to another person, feels remorse about it, and believes that he or she can do better. That's the definition of self-forgiveness. And here, so we see kind of a mix here. There's mixed feelings on these. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more when we get to the gender division here. So we're going to just talk about the gold items and orange at the bottom, because it seems appropriate to narrow it down to gender divisions, but also what happened to people. So we're going to be looking at people who were targeted for violence for one reason or another, and also ones who checked the box that they have been implicated in genocide. I see I'm running out of time already. So here we have women victims, and I'm going to flip the slide. Male victims. Do you see much difference? Not much. We'll talk about another time where the differences are, but bottom line, when it comes to trait forgiveness, it seems that religious identity in this case trumps gender differences, even though in forgiveness research, women generally tend to forgive more than men, who are more interested in justice than in relationships, or this is the theory. Okay, let's jump to divine forgiveness. And here there is a little bit more variation. There's a bit of ambivalence, particularly about their feeling about themselves, whether or not they are able to be forgiven by God. Women seem a little bit more tentative about this than men. And the last one, self-forgiveness, we're really all over the map here. Just look at the colors and how they change. There's not a lot of consensus here. And let me just read to you a couple of the items, and I'm already over, I apologize. So do I have 1 minute yet?
1 minute. Yeah.
Okay, 1 minute, okay. So I love myself, I feel self-acceptance, my actions violated something important to me. Here we have some agreement. I acknowledge that I'm blamed for my actions, and there we have a lot of variation. And just to look at the bottom, this is where we do finally have agreement, where it says, I won't do it again. I won't repeat my offense again. This is the measure that predicts the greatest psychic damage. If people can't forgive themselves, even if they're forgiven by others, even if they feel forgiven by God, this is where the problem comes. So this is just a little overview. We're unpacking this information, looking at age cohorts, looking at genocide situations and so forth to understand how this is working. But that's just a kind of a brief look at the study that we'll be continuing to analyze. And the main thing is we feel that by doing so, that forgiveness is really an important part of lifting the genocide burden. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jolene. We're now going to go to our next speaker, Odette Murara, who will be joining us online. And here she is. I see her there. We're going to get her set up so she could present. And if you have a PowerPoint, we'll get that sorted for you too. We're almost there.
Yeah, I'm almost there. Thank you.
You're welcome. So go ahead whenever, there. Maybe put it in presentation mode on the bottom there.
Okay.
There we go. Wonderful. Please
Yeah, can you all see it? Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about complexities of genocide in Rwanda in the eyes of widows. Once again, my name is Odette Murara. I'm based at the University of Calgary in Alberta, Canada. So let's talk about genocide widows in Rwanda just in general, because I know I just have 15 minutes. That's not a lot, so I'll try to be on time. The 1994 genocide in Rwanda, it is said that it has really targeted men and boys more than it did for women and girls, where approximately 75% of those who lost their lives during genocide were men. And then because of that, our beautiful Rwanda country was renamed the Land of Widows, according to the author. However, the United Nations has just put a figure for us to understand, but in this way, according to the scholarship, the United Nations is looking at widows in a picture of what happened during Rwanda and even across borders. And they come to a conclusion that about 500,000 Rwandan women have been widowed by the war. So widows in post-genocide Rwanda, either from inter-ethnic or mono-ethnic marriages, had to face a lot of challenges because looking at the Rwandan structure, men are more providers, and most of these women, therefore, were just left on their own, taking care of the orphans. And so some of the challenges included poverty, isolation, sexual violence and rape, social exclusion, and trauma. So today I'm looking at women from monoethnic marriages and also intermarriages. So I'm going to talk about Hutu women or Hutu widows who were married to either Hutu or Tutsi men, and the Tutsi women who were married to Hutu, because these categories share complex stories of exclusion and rejection from the schemes that were introduced soon after genocide and that were meant to support these widows. So I want to be talking about Tutsi widows who were married to Tutsi men, because those ones actually were 100% supported by these schemes, as we are going to see. So what are the schemes am I talking about? There is Avega and FARD, which were the state-funded programs for genocide survivors in Rwanda. These two major mechanisms for justice were introduced once again to support widows who were suffering from trauma, from the loss of their beloved husbands, and also raising their own kids on their own, the orphans. In 1995, that's when Avega started. Avega stands for Association des Veuves du Génocide à Gahozo. So it's a French theme. And it was again introduced to support widows. So Agahozo, it's a Kinyarwanda word, which actually means, consoling, consoling someone, as consoling widows who had lost their beloved ones. So it was intentionally focusing on social support. 3 years later, in 1995, an assistance fund for genocide survivors, namely for the Assistance aux Rescapés du Génocide, FARCH, was also formed and focused more on supporting orphans of genocide, offering scholarships and school fees. So these are two schemes that I'm going to be discussing, looking at who benefited from what and to what extent, who was excluded and why. According to Avega, they say, when you look at their website, they say that today they serve about 20,000 genocide widows and over 70,000 of their dependents across the country of Rwanda. So both Avega and FARD partner in providing socioeconomic support to genocide widows and orphans, but the question still remains, who is or who is not benefiting from these schemes and programs therein? So, like I said earlier, these two schemes were introduced because they wanted to bring about programs to support widows and orphans in the field of healthcare, women's rights and social protection, access to justice and advocacy, peace building and conflict management, child protection, and also education, like I said earlier. So when you look at these programs or initiatives, you realize that these were really needed. They came at the right time because widows needed them, all right? So now, because I was curious to know who benefits from these programs and who doesn't, and why and how, I really had to do a research with widows who are based in Rwanda, although few of them are also in exile, but they have lived in Rwanda soon after genocide. So to be in contact with them, really, you might wonder, oh, how did she manage to do so? Because like the previous presenter had said it's not easy to talk about ethnic, identities in Rwanda today. It's not even easy to approach people to ask them about survival, past experiences about the genocide and so on and so forth. But thank God, like some years back, I think in 2015, I met two widows actually, and we had some informal discussion, and they were just telling me about their experiences and so on. So this has just been used as a window for me to go back to them, ask them to converse again, to talk about their experiences, and I was luckily connected to their friends. So as I say in here, 6 widows, two widows married to Hutu men, 2 Hutu men married to Tutsi men, and 2 Tutsi widows married to Tutsi men were actually part of my study. So interviews were conducted over WhatsApp calls. And again, to complement with these narratives I was getting, I had also to involve 2 orphans of these widows. Out of the, so in total there are 8 interviewees. 3 of them currently live in exile, like I said, but they lived in Rwanda soon after genocide. So again, as opposed to structured interviews, widows' stories appeared through ordinary conversations, and a few unstructured questions were posed just for elaboration. So I just told them that, whatever they're telling me is confidential. I'm going to use pseudonyms. None of their names is going to appear, because in Rwanda, most of the time when you talk to people there, they are so careful about what they say over the phone because they don't want to be in danger. And when you read the literature, you realize that many scholars who have just done research in Rwanda have been facing issues of, ethical issues whereby the government could just stop you from talking to participants when they just feel like whatever you are saying is not what they are interested in. So I had all this in mind. I knew what to say and what not to say. And I set them free to say, yeah, none of their names would be mentioned in our conversations. So now this takes us to complexities of genocide in Rwanda, widows' experiences of exclusion and rejection. Hutu genocide widows were excluded from participating in the Avega and FARG programs, whether they were previously married to a Hutu or Tutsi man. Hutu genocide orphans from Hutu parents and orphans from mixed parentage were excluded from those who got education support from FARG. Tutsi genocide widows were rejected by fellow Tutsi survivors for having been married to a Hutu man before and raising Hutu kids. Tutsi genocide orphans were not supported because their survived mothers seeking support were Hutus. So, in Rwanda, kids follow their father's ethnicity. So if you are a Hutu woman and your husband is a Tutsi, the kid will be regarded as a Tutsi. But in post-genocide, this was no longer making sense because the Tutsi man is gone, is no more. Now you are there to ask for support for your orphans who are Tutsi, but who is asking for support was a Hutu. Therefore, Hutu women were not getting those support, regardless of raising Tutsi children. So now I want to talk about a few stories that these women had shared with me. Mukamabano is a Hutu genocide widow and is the mother to Tutsi orphans. By the way, although an extra story of her narrative is not put in here, but Mukamabano is also a Hutu woman who was raped by the brother-in-law, a Tutsi who survived the genocide. So Mukamabano, who had about 4 kids, according to her story, had an extra kid, making it 5 kids to raise without even any support. So she was telling me how she went to a Vega office asking for support. And when she was there, she was just about imyirondoro, that is lineage information, and that of their late husband. Where are you from? What is your ethnicity? And so on. They promised to follow up on her and her kids, but she never heard from them again. But later, she came to know that one of her friends was actually supported. Then another story is also from Wamaria, who is also a Hutu widow, a mother to Tutsi orphans. She went to narrate that her second daughter went to university, but thanks to her sister who lives abroad, who lives in Europe. So Wamaria's daughter ended up getting a job in the city, and she's taking care of her mom financially and also her siblings. And Wamaria adds that here in the rural area, she was going to suffer with the rest of the family, because this also tells how Wamaria did not get any support regardless of raising Tutsi kids. What about a story of a Tutsi widow with the Hutu orphans? Kanhuyo is a Tutsi woman who was married to a Hutu who died during genocide. So in 1995, Kanhuyo's brother was living in exile in Uganda and his family, and then returned to Rwanda. His kids were age mates with Kanhuyo's own kids, and so as cousins, they played together all the time. Kanhuyo's brother was well off. He ran business, and the wife had a good job. At the time, Kanhuyo became so ill, and her brother decided to take her 2 youngest kids, a daughter and a son, to his house, while Kanhuyo was living with eldest daughter, and 3 of her older sons had gone to the city to find survival for themselves, although they were so young to do so. Her story continues. Kanhuyo's nephews, who were Tutsis, and nieces' school fees were paid by FARC. And since FARC asked about one's identities in terms of ethnicity, ethnic group of both parents to be added on the sponsorship list, Kanhuyo's own kids were denied the opportunity because their father was a Hutu. So these are Hutu kids who are living with the Tutsi kids whose school fees are paid by FARC. But when you read about what FARC does, normally FARC supports survivors and orphans, but Kanhuyo's nephews and nieces were not orphans, but they were Tutsis. So their cousins started insulting them. That is, cousins, nephews and nieces of Kanhuyo were insulting their cousins who have a mother Tutsi and a Hutu father. They were calling them names. Kanhuyo says that they were actually all insulted because whenever she approached the people for advice, including her own brother, she was always told, wararengereye ndetse n'abana n'abahutu. So this meaning, this is a Kinyarwanda sentence, which means you have broken the rules to marry a Hutu, and your kids are Hutus. Sometimes they even traumatize them by calling them Interahamwe. Interahamwe referring to the Hutu extremists who committed the genocide. Her kids have been perceived and treated as Interahamwe in the eye of their own cousins. They have always been insulted that they have never been supported as orphans because they are Interahamwe. Her kids left their uncle's house to stay in the city with their older brothers. But still today, as she narrated, they do not talk to each other. Cousins don't speak. They have become enemies. There's also a story about segregation. Kanyange is a Tutsi woman whose husband before genocide was a Tutsi. They gave birth to Tutsi kids. And after, she remarried with the Hutu man. But she was telling her story about how the first kids whom she got with the Tutsi, a Tutsi who died before genocide by, ordinary death, were supported by FARC. And then the ones she gave birth to after genocide were just segregated. They were not supported by FARC because they were Hutus. And so she was also telling her story. Because of my time, I don't have to read this, but she was just telling her story about how her own kids have been segregated by the system. Those who were not supported by FARC could not further their education, but yeah, they got used, they have now grown up, they understand things. Yeah, so sometimes when you hear the Rwandan people telling you that, it also has more information and more meaning. Now, what about the story of the Hutu widow with the Hutu orphans? I think I'm running out of my minutes. How many more minutes do I have?
Can you finish up in about 1 minute or so?
Okay, so I'll be done in a minute. So now a story of Hutu widow versus, Hutu widows with Hutu orphans. That is Hutu widows who were married to Hutu men. This woman, her name is Mukanwari, she says, we are not abagenerwabikorwa. Abagenerwabikorwa is a Kinyarwanda word used to say those who don't deserve, So her husband died during genocide in Rwanda and she survived with the 5 children. But she's not allowed to talk about her husband in the Gacaca courts because her husband was a Hutu. She went on to say, her children became orphans due to the state-sponsored violence, but they have no right to be supported because they are regarded as people who do not belong to well-deserved category, the abagenerwabikorwa. She is excluded in everything and she has accepted it. But before I finish, I just want to say, there is also an ethnic identity crisis in post-genocide Rwanda, especially among Hutu survivors and Tutsi survivors from inter-ethnic marriages, because they don't know how to be called. They wonder if they'll be Abatutsi, who standing for Hutu, standing for Tutsi, because in Rwanda today they say there is no ethnicity. In our national IDs, they no longer write Hutu or Tutsi, but people are just being excluded and rejected based on their ethnic identity. So they wonder, who are we? Are we Hutu? Are we Hutsi or what are we? So looking at these stories, these 2 orphans, one is the son of a Hutu widow and the late Tutsi father. Another one is the opposite, is the son of a Tutsi with the late Hutu father. But all they talk about, they just say they have been, code names, Abakwikwi to denote Hutus, a tribe associated with committing genocide. Others are like, at school, we could not fit anywhere in the associations, even where our own cousins belong. Students belong to different associations, especially those supported by FARC. It created some confusion among us and in the Rwandan community. So since I only had 1 minute, I'll end it there. And I'll just say, I'll just finish with this quote. When tribal clans fight, the victor is required to take care of the vanquished widows and the orphans, which puts a limitation on bloodshed and tempers warring groups to try and negotiate a compromise. And I hope this is what should have taken place in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odette. We'll now turn to our last speaker, and Marko, please proceed.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate in this panel. My name is Marko. I am currently a junior at Pacific Lutheran University, working towards 2 bachelor's degrees in history and Holocaust and genocide studies. After graduating in December of this year, I plan on going to graduate school to pursue research in the field of genocide studies. We know that during war, it is common that rape has been used to instill fear into a population. The United Nations claims that rape committed during war is often intended to terrorize a population, break up families, destroy communities, and, in some instances, change the ethnic makeup of the next generation. Grim as this all is, it fails to consider a significant byproduct, the deliberate use of rape to spread disease. I intend to examine the intentional wartime spread of HIV by the Interahamwe during the 1994 Abatutsi genocide. I argue that the rapes and the subsequent spread of HIV demonstrates a slow genocide defined as the emotional and physical harm done to survivors of violence over time against the Rwandan Abatutsi. Moreover, Tutsi women themselves were essentially turned into biological weapons in the perpetration of this slow genocide. Despite the lack of official recognition by the United Nations, rape has been recognized by many scholars and institutions as an act of genocide. In 2004, Sherry Russell Brown summarized this argument for such recognition. This is ethnic rape as an official policy of war in a genocidal campaign for political control. It is specifically rape under orders. This is not rape out of control, it is rape under control. It is also rape unto death, rape as massacre, rape to kill and to make their victims wish they were dead. It is rape to drive a wedge through a community, to shatter a society, to destroy a people. It is rape as genocide. I agree with Russell Brown that rape itself is a violent act of genocide. Victims of the 1994 rape campaigns were subjected to various forms of sexual violence, including sexual assaults, mutilation, torture, and HIV infection. I want to focus on the aftermath of rape and specifically the transmission of HIV in Rwanda. This spread has resulted in a slow-moving genocide for the already victimized populations. Unfortunately, while scholars recognize women subsequently died of AIDS, they haven't explored this phenomenon. Philip Vermouth, who broke down 18 different ways that victims were killed during the 1994 genocide, recognized this, stating that when a woman died of AIDS after 1994, and the disease was contracted because of the rapes in 1994, the woman is not registered as a casualty in the data. In my research, I have not found any scholarly work done on this topic. However, Rwandans themselves have recognized the impact of HIV. One accusation of the intentional spread of AIDS comes from Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda, who alleged in 2002 that the previous Hutu government knowingly released AIDS patients out of hospitals to form battalions of rapists to rape Tutsi women. Scholars have shown that whereas only 35% of the Rwandan armed forces were HIV positive at the time of the genocide, 70% of the 25,000 members of the Interahamwe carried HIV before the genocide began. The militiamen carrying the virus wielded their disease as a weapon just as effectively as they wielded a machete. Therefore, men who knew that they were HIV positive not only victimized women through rape, but also through the intentional spread of HIV. One woman reported that her rapist told her that a bullet should not be wasted on her because she would die of AIDS. According to Peter of the Rwandan Women's Network, these rapists would tell their women that they wanted them to die slowly, so that the killing would continue long after the actual genocide has stopped. Paula Donovan, advisor of HIV/AIDS in Africa to UNICEF, writes, until the very last of the Interahamwe's, rape victims die of AIDS, and until all the HIV positive children born to those victims and all the sex partners subsequently infected by them have died. In effect, the genocide continues. In 2001, an estimated 500,000 Rwandans were living with HIV and AIDS. A study conducted that same year showed that only 28% of households could afford HIV antiretroviral treatment. Even as late as 2007, those without medication died within 7 to 15 years after being infected. Because of the lack of antiretrovirals available, many women refused to get tested. One survivor stated, "I don't have access to the drugs, so what do I gain from accepting this disease?" Survivors experienced a suspended death sentence, waiting for the day that they would die from an AIDS-related illness. Anne-Marie contracted HIV after being gang raped for 16 men for 6 days during the genocide. When she learned she was HIV positive 2 years later, she said that she could no longer count herself a survivor of the genocide. She was not shot in the head like her husband, nor was she hacked to death by a machete, but she knew she was going to die because of what she endured in 1994. In Rwanda, they call survivors of the genocide those who escaped the sword, but Anne-Marie said she feels as though the sword is still in her. Clementine, another survivor who contracted HIV due to the rape she endured in 1994, recalls her neighbor's continuous reminders that she was going to die soon because of her HIV status. Clementine wondered, is this a life worth living? For some survivors, the answer was no. Hykathia stated, "When I first found out that I was HIV positive in 2000, I refused to take the antiretroviral because I wanted to die." Another survivor, Marie Odette, claimed that all hope abandoned her when she learned she was HIV positive. She asserted that so much pain lives inside us survivors, and the fact that most of us live with HIV makes things worse. Because of their disease, survivors were constantly reminded of the genocide in 1994. Not only did women have to suffer with the knowledge of their own HIV status, but they were also plagued with the knowledge that they had become a vector for future transmission to their loved ones. Once infected, a woman was a biological weapon against any future sexual partners and children she may have. Multiple women reported that their husbands died of HIV after they were reunited. Jeanette blamed herself for her husband's death, stating that he was also infected. "I think I might have been the one who infected him." Not only did she blame herself for her husband's death, but she also struggled with inadvertently infecting her own children. In 2005, she had her youngest child tested for HIV because he was chronically ill. When the results came back positive, she herself got tested along with the rest of her children. 2 of the 3 of the children that she bore after the genocide were HIV positive. Additionally, 1 child she had before the genocide was also positive. Jeanette believes she infected this child because she was still breastfeeding them when she was raped and infected with HIV. Congenital infection denied the future children of rape survivors the opportunity to grow up without HIV and have healthy children of their own. Without access to antiretroviral treatment, children face the possibility of dying of AIDS-related illness before they were able to have Tutsi children of their own, furthering the Tutsi genocide into later generations. Apart from the effects of the spread of the disease, slow genocide also occurred through the alienation of women who were raped. Some women reported that their HIV positive status erased their potential marital prospects. Beatrice said, "The man I was about to marry did not want to marry me after he found out about my HIV status." This rejection of women by potential marital partners further decreased the number of Tutsi children in the next generation. Additionally, communities rejected women who were HIV positive, leaving them to sink further into poverty. As a rape survivor with HIV, women were often denied rights of inheritance and employment opportunities. As one woman stated, "Because I am HIV positive, my bosses fired me because they were afraid I could contaminate their own children. Even now, where I am working, they have a problem with me because of the same issue." Furthermore, the women had a hard time returning to the rigors of agricultural work due to the debilitating nature of this disease, particularly in its later stages. This meant they lost their livelihoods. Marie stated that she was only able to work in the field for an hour at most due to how HIV affected her. Not only did communities turn their back on survivors of rape who were infected with HIV, but victims of families did as well. Immaculée recounted, "Since the genocide, my oldest daughter has come to hate me. I was not there to take care of her during the genocide. She cannot deal with the fact that her mother was raped. When I told her I was HIV positive, she told me I was better off dead. My youngest children even had to come to the hospital to protect me from my daughter. Families were irrevocably torn apart, leading to a loss of support systems. HIV-positive rape victims in Rwanda faced a double burden. According to Amnesty International, in addition to the stigma of having been raped, rape survivors living with HIV are also marginalized, insulted, or belittled because of their infection. All of these factors I have laid out here has contributed to the slow and continued genocide of the Rwandan Abatutsi. As rape receives increasing recognition as a violation of human rights and as an act of genocide, it is also important to recognize and examine the lasting effects of a rape on a population during a genocide. Because of the deliberate spread of HIV by the Interahamwe's rape battalions, the Abatutsi genocide continued. Those who were initially and intentionally infected with HIV were turned into biological weapons meant to infect the next generation of Abatutsi. These are the forgotten victims of the Abatutsi genocide. The militiamen did not kill them immediately. Rather, they became unwitting vectors of transmission before their lives were claimed. These women were used against their will to be a means of continuing the genocide for years after 1994. Their lives and their deaths cannot be overlooked. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure how to respond, but we have a question from the audience. Lisa, you wanna,
Seems to me to be very honest, but so it addresses, I asked all of you, but
I'm gonna ask you to come up because I think this is the only. Did it work before, the other microphone? Okay.
does this work?
Okay. Will that
Okay.
work for anybody who's online? Okay, they can hear?
Well,
Okay.
Both Dr. Murara and Anna Marko have provided us with ample evidence of ways in which discriminatory practices by the state and within the community continue to sow divisions 30 years after the genocide. So I'd like all three of you, but I want to start with Jolene Chu, to sort of consider how this would challenge the kinds of forgiveness that you are, I mean, we all very much want to see, right? And that you are looking at in your study. Because it certainly appears as though we're not looking at a healing society here. Okay, that's my question.
Thank you.
Great question. So I'll just give a short answer that has to do with the religious framework that we're looking at. One of the slides I didn't get to, but it was one of my favorite questions in the survey. When you think of the genocide, which scripture helps you to cope? And we gave them a list of looking ahead and peace on earth and forgive your enemies as you're being forgiven. I was very surprised that the top choice of the coping scripture was return evil for evil to no one. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord or Jehovah. So what that said to me is that the coping for this particular religious group, that is millennials, that they're looking for the kingdom of God to solve all problems, that they have to resort to this scripture probably often when genocide thoughts come back, and I would say also continuing acts of injustice, that they just have to put this burden on God. And I think that's how they cope emotionally with it. Other than that, because witnesses are politically neutral, I would say that they wouldn't venture actually to agitate for political solutions to this problem, although no doubt their eyes are just as open as any in Rwanda to the inequities.
I think I'm going to take a roundabout answer, but I will get to your answer. Some of you may have noticed that during my speech, I never once say Rwandan genocide. And I did that very intentionally because when we say the Rwandan genocide, we typically automatically think of the almost 1 million people that were, million Tutsis and moderate Hutus that were killed in 1994. But there's also evidence to show that the Rwandan Patriotic Front was committing a genocide in their own in killing innocent Hutus. And that continued from 1994 through the Congo Wars in 1997, where they killed over 1 million Hutus. So my roundabout answer to it is, if we have the general of the Rwandan Patriotic Front as the current day president, and we have yet to establish that there was not one but 2 genocides occurring at the same time, how can we, despite the claim that the Rwanda Patriotic Front is for reconciliation and repatriation, if they're not actually doing that, if refugees, specifically Hutu refugees, are scared to come back into the country because they'll be killed for their ethnicity, I don't think you can move forward with forgiveness, because you still have a genocidal militia ruling over the country. It's just no longer the Interahamwe or President Habyarimana. So that's my best answer for you.
And Dr. Murara, do you want to also respond to that question?
Thank you so much. I just want to compliment with what the colleague has just said, because it's really hard that we can talk about reconciliation and healing when some people are excluded. You see, when you look at the programs of Avega, for instance, that's where women who survived the genocide and their orphans, who today, actually their orphans are now big men and big women, married, they have their own kids. But then that's where they were supposed to be meeting and talk and just, you know, find solutions together about how they can say genocide never again. Not only saying, but also practice it. But the problem is, those who were supposed to be part of those conversations, you know, are prohibited or they are excluded from attending. So what worries me is the intergenerational trauma that goes on from those widows who are now in the 60s, 70s and above, and their kids, from their kids to their grandkids. That intergenerational trauma is so dangerous. That's why it's so hard to talk about, you know, country reconstruction, peace building in Rwanda today, and even healing itself. There are so many wounds, traumatic issues that haven't been healed because there was no safe space where Rwandans would just feel welcome and belonging regardless of their ethnic groups. So they would just feel that they are accepted, therefore they are in the journey of getting healed and reconstructing themselves. So it's a long journey. It's really tough. So I think I also, what came in my mind when the colleague was talking about religion, I was like, what role has religion played in, you know, in building peace in post-genocide Rwanda? And so not everyone is religious. So if we may just think of maybe biblical verses, someone will tell you, even when it happened, those verses were there, God was there, and God was watching. So it's still a long journey, but we need a safe space for every Rwandan to feel comfortable, welcome, and belonging, and participate in the processes of peace building. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the floor here in the room? Anybody? Sure.
Okay, so I have one for you, Jolene. So you said that to get past like post-genocide Rwanda, you have recovery, reconciliation, and reconstruction. And I was curious about repatriation involved in that. as well, just because in 94, you see the exodus in refugees, but that same year you see 700,000 people come back into Rwanda because they feel as though they don't have to live in exile anymore. But if you have, groups of people that are exiled before 94 and can return, and then you have the newly exiled people that don't feel as though they can return but are being pushed back into, at what point does repatriation have to become a part of post-genocide Rwanda?
Wow, I think that's a little bit above my pay grade, Hannah. That's okay. It's again a great question, and without a conflict resolution or a poli-sci background, I don't know that I could really comment. I will have to say again, in the area that I do know of the relationships within congregations of witnesses that have this whole mix of everyone. It's something that the data will bring out because we have questions to show those who have returned, when they left, when they returned, and so forth. And this is where breaking down that forgiveness data will really be interesting. We'll have to say that we did ask. There are several resilience scales. This is a current topic in psychology. And we did ask, so what does the congregation do for you? Do you feel supported? Do you feel understood? And it seemed like across the board that there was consensus that it is the one place that they could come where the past wasn't important to them, that the unspoken ethnic background wasn't important, again, that they could just share the faith together. Now, that's the ideal. That's the way the respondents described their feelings. But then what will really help us get at that is then looking at things like trauma, looking at things like feelings of anger and looking at those levels. So that's not an answer to your question, but I think that it's important for us to, as one example, if it is working, where religion should, to Odette's point, play this role of helping people to reduce those boundaries and differences between them.
Any other questions? I would like to pose one. So the research that I did on Rwanda had to do with education. And in the decade after the genocide, the government of Rwanda reached out to many education specialists, including some here in the United States in peace education circles, and kind of said, well, what should we do? And many of those experts suggested that infusing critical thinking into the curriculum in a responsible way, consistently, starting with younger children up through high school, would be the kind of a prophylactic against future violence, because we know cycles of violence repeat. After developing like a lot of curriculum materials, the government decided not to do that. Instead, they moved to, we're all Rwandans now, and ethnicity is outlawed as public speech. And I guess, we're now even another decade or generation past that. And I guess, what are your reflections from each of your different kinds of research about that decision that the government made? Did they make the right decision to basically outlaw ethnic speech to try and make everybody forget about that past? Or should they have done more in the direction of critical thinking in the curriculum of like K through 12? Just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Okay,
Yes,
I can go first.
please.
Yeah, so I actually think the government did a wrong thing, because they should have actually allowed that curriculum to take place and see what comes out of it. Because in Rwanda, they have introduced what is called Ndi Umunyarwanda. Ndi Umunyarwanda means I am Rwandan. Everyone knows it's Rwandan, right? If you are Rwandan, you are Rwandan. But when they brought that concept, was a way of saying, okay, forget about you being a Hutu, you being a Tutsi, you being a Twa, you know, those three ethnic groups you have there. But like I said, not saying it does not mean that it's not actually happening. People are being favored based on that, based on the ethnic group. People are being, you know, excluded based on the ethnic group. So to me, I feel like talking about it, having it in the discourse would actually be better than just saying it's not there, don't talk about it. And when it's actually happening through the practices that we see and we hear every day. So then the Rwanda thing and the removal of ethnicity is just a good thing for me. You know, in Kinyarwanda, we say, so when you have a sickness or when you have a wound somewhere, you have to talk about it. You have to show it off so it can be healed. Maybe someone will tell you, oh, are you suffering from this? Okay, so here is what you can do. Here is a medicine or something. But if you hide it, if you don't talk about it, it will remain within, it will be rotten. You may even end up losing a hand or a leg, depending on where the wound is. So I think also there is an issue of, you know, hiding the truth. Like when you talk up with most Rwandans, they'll tell you our history starts from 1994, which is not true. Our history has been the history before that. So there are things that should be just be said so they can, as a part of healing, part of reconstructing the country, part of building more peace. That's what I think.
Thank you. Yes, please. Let's get you a microphone.
I was wondering, right, the concept of
Stand here so we.
oh, sorry. Okay, so I was wondering about the concept of forgiveness, right? So in relation to what is going on right now in Nigeria, the Boko Haram issue, right? That is an ongoing event. And we've had situations where governments have actually tried to persuade these people to stop the terrorist acts, and it's still ongoing, right? So how do you relate the concept of forgiveness with this? How do you forgive when the issue is not even resolved? So I would like you to shed more light, because I think your concept can actually apply to other cases, right? So I just want more clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I like the statement of Chris Topolo this morning that all of our relationships are moral relationships. Of course, a peace stance is problematic in the face of injustice, just as we see in the world that meeting violence with violence also is messy, right? When you have people who are bent on doing harm, that's where the problem is. Forgiveness is something that, as I mentioned, can happen internally, or it can happen with an other. If the other is not willing to seek it, then that's a futile exercise. And so I think for the respondents in our study, and based on my interviews with both Holocaust and survivors of the Rwandan genocide, that the peace that they find that allows them personally to move on comes from letting go and leaving the offense with God. And admittedly, this doesn't stop injustice, but perhaps it stops a cycle of payback. And this, for witnesses, not everybody's comfortable with that position, but this is their way of making the personal contribution to peace in the world by not continuing a legacy of revenge and leaving it in divine hands. That's not, I realize, and some of witnesses also have been among those who have suffered in these various places. And so they're certainly not immune or having their head in the clouds with these very tragic circumstances. But all I can speak to is their personal investment in peace. Who knows, those 400 who died, among them those we're trying to help and rescue, others, witnesses, relatives, didn't matter. What difference did they make? Well, they left us an example that people can behave humanely, even in such circumstances.
Janine? Oh, no.
Do we want to?
And we've got one more speaker after.
Oh, there's one. Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. I want to address, let's see if I can be here. So I have two comments actually, and maybe a question. One is, as people, again, this is like a perfect, well, they were all great panels, but the way this panel was put together, like each presentation, the way they fit into each other, just beautiful. And as I'm listening to Dr. Murara and you, Anna, how you're talking about the situation in Rwanda and on the board, across the borders. And I can't help, think about those people who were silenced, right? Who haven't been able to talk about their pain. They are there, right? But then they show up in the church, in the Jehovah's Witnesses, worship. Then I'm going to get to and I had to make it to give a personal experience, but there are people who get silenced and they have to move on because they don't have a choice. And so what happened with me, I've been a Christian all my life. And I really believe, and nothing can change that part of what feeds my soul. So growing up, having been told that we could not talk about genocide, your father did not die. And if he died, he was an enemy of the nation anyway. So you can't talk about it. That's it. So we marched on in life knowing that we lost our loved ones in mass. It wasn't just one family, many. And the government, that the perpetrator regime was in charge for decades. So we had to there's no way you could talk about it. You could use it in your brain, like, why am I not talking about it? But really, you couldn't we did not entertain the possibility. Nobody, we wouldn't ask, hey, can we just say it publicly? What would happen? Nope, zip. So anyway, fast forward, I joined the groups, religious groups, I'm Catholic, and I was chiming in and saying, they would ask me to testify that I've forgiven the people who killed my father, my brother, my cousins. And I said, oh, sure, of course I've forgiven them. And I would say, yep, I'll go in front of audiences and say, I've forgiven them. And I really, in my head, I thought that was the way it was. And I marched on thinking I've forgiven them. Guess what? 2013, when I started telling my story, oh boy, it came out raw. I was angry, I was mad, I was angry with every single person who took the story of my father, the one who made us be so poor growing up. I was mad, I was angry. But I was allowed to process it. And this university again has allowed me that space to slowly eventually get to a point when now I can forgive them wholeheartedly. In my head, in my heart, I forgive them. But do you know how I got to forgive them? Because they were also turned into animals. I can tell you with conviction, after doing research, there was a tiny minority that wanted to hold on to the power, but really brought evil by training militia, training younger people, and so on, telling them if you don't kill them, they will kill you first. Those are animals anyway, they are snakes, they are horrible, you can kill them, it's okay. All of that training, they were changing them, they were removing the Ubuntu from them and putting horrible ideas instead. And so those who were killers, and yes, I know people will not agree with me, but perpetrators were changed into animals. In Kirundi, we say, barabaye ibikoko. They have become animals. They couldn't possibly kill if they still had Ubuntu in them. So someone trained them. That's how I was able to just look at it and say, you know what? My neighbor who went and killed, and the other one, and the other, we knew them. And you live, imagine living with the perpetrators and you can't say a thing. You know where the mass graves are and you can't say a thing. And they live that way for decades, not saying a thing. So they had moral torture, the perpetrators themselves, just living with those wonderful people. They killed their father and the children are growing up so poor. And by the way, the property, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. The property that's been taken, whether it's in Rwanda or anywhere, it's still in the hands of those who are not supposed to have it in many cases. So those who went back, you mentioned Anna, those who went back. So some left, and then there are some who came in and took the property of those who owned them. So all that mess, forgiveness is complicated. I mean, we all agree it's complicated, right? But most importantly for me is those who are saying I'm forgiven, have they really forgiven? I don't know. I mean, we can check, but it would be nice to go back and distinguish, separate those who have had the chance to publicly mourn and those who haven't had the chance to publicly mourn. That's how I would look at it in this. So thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was here this afternoon. I'm coming back again. I'm here. Okay, again, I'm Dr. Olivier Kamanzi. I'm from Rwanda. I'm glad to see you talking about Rwanda. So my good sister on the other side. Thank you so much for this conversation. It allows me to go back. I live here in Chicago, but I had the opportunity to go back to Rwanda, actually work for the government of Rwanda, contribute to the building of Rwanda. However, I did disagree on the way to have only one-sided narrative of there is one story side. Even I had the opportunity to discuss with the high level for the government because I was independent enough. I speak my mind. If I disagree with something, I say it. So I heard talking more on reconciliation and forgiveness more. Maybe I could hear more about the truth and justice. You touched about it. The truth is, I think the Dr. Murara and you mentioned about it. So Rwandan people did not wake up in the morning and start killing each other, right? That's those behind what happened. They are not held accountable. Those who are held accountable are us, Rwandans, right? So how about the other side? So we don't see much. We don't see much. That's the truth. There is that narrative now is being one-sided in Rwanda. That's what government, just one side, because they have a protection, superpower, or whatever, and then that narratives keep going on. And then the other side, when you try to address the issue of the other side, you are being called a denial. Because you don't agree with government narrative. I think the fact that you can say the truth is not wrong. We need to be able to tell the truth. That's why I'm coming up. We don't know, we know the truth. All of us, especially Rwandans, know what happened. But that truth is not being told. That's number one. When we now talk about justice, you mentioned about the RPF, those people who killed the Hutu side, they're still in power. They have never been held accountable. Can they be held accountable as well because they killed, but they are no power? Those are reality, those is the truth, but we don't hear much in the media, right? So my question to you, Dr. Murara, and you, don't remember your name again, Anna, is how do you address the issue for truth and justice in your work you have done? How do you address it? Thank you.
Who would like to respond first? Anybody?
Okay, I'll go. Thank you so much, Olivier. In our language, we say urakoze cyane. Thank you. Like Olivier has just said, we are not hearing truth from both sides, simply because some people are in power, right? So those who are in power, if they choose not to say anything, what do we do? Nothing. So for me, I feel like, and I said this before, if we don't have a space where people will voice out whatever is in their heart, I'm telling you, it's hard to achieve the justice, it's hard to achieve peace, it's hard to reconcile. Whom are you reconciling with? Huh? If you want to reconcile with me, that means there should be a space where you and I have to meet and talk. So if you want to reconcile with me and it's just you and people of your side meeting there, you are reconciling with who? I'm not part of the reconciliation process. So telling the truth is needed, but there is no space for that. That's one thing. And what is needed is to create that space. Who created that space? It's we Rwandans, but how? I was chatting with somebody recently and we were actually making those comments. We were just saying, you know, when it comes to genocide, it's a crime which never gets old. It's a crime which is, you know, so the thing is, those who are ruling, the RPF and, you know, friends of RPF, they want to use that word, you know, as a way to punish and to limit the so regarded as perpetrators not to say anything, you know. The moment they know that you are able to stand there, Olivier or me or anyone, to just say, hey, I want to create a space where Rwandans will meet and discuss regardless of who belongs to which ethnic group, they will just say, hey, genocide denial, genocide ideology. So they use that word. So the way genocide is conceptualized among Rwandans, it's just, it makes it so tough for us to have that space. But we believe that with the time, we will be able to talk and act. But it's a long journey. And it takes me and you. First of all, I would say having a space like this one today, it's one way of telling the truth. So we need more spaces like this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we have one question coming from online. Camilo, are you able to share that question with us?
Yeah, this question is from Justin K. He's actually made a couple of questions. This first one is for Dr. Murara. He's asking, which ethnic group are you part of among the two of Rwanda? And he's actually asking also, well, he made another question, but that was answered in the last answer. So I'm gonna ask the other ones he posed, which is it possible in Rwanda today for people from the two groups to get married? If yes, then how would you convince that there is no reconciliation in the country?
Okay, so those are good questions. So someone is asking me about my ethnic group. I'm one of the confused as well because I'm from mixed lineages. But in as much as like on my father's side, there are Tutsi and Hutus, and my mother, same thing, but my dad is regarded as a Hutu, so I'm a Hutu, regardless of the mixtures. Okay, what was the last question again? Sorry.
He's asking, is it possible in Rwanda today for people from the two groups to get married? If yes, then how would you convince that there is no reconciliation in the country?
Oh my goodness. You know, when it comes to intimacy, I think it's something else. You know, we really get the people getting intermarried today. We have people who have been ethnically intermarrying during genocide and before that. So to me, I don't feel like someone being a Hutu marrying a Tutsi or a Tutsi marrying a Hutu woman does not mean reconciliation. This is not the reconciliation we are talking about. By the way, if I can share this, someone else recently was just talking about it. This person was like, you know what? We have Hutu people in exile, especially youth. Some of them were born after genocide, after 1994. But then they were born in exile from Hutu families. And these kids today, when they want to get married, they are marrying Tutsi women. And so they are going to Kigali and get a Tutsi woman. There is nothing new they are doing. This has always been there. But what this person was reminding me was like, no, it's just it's a political strategy that when you go there, most of girls and women in good positions and good schools, those whom you will visibly see easily are Tutsi women. You know, they are Tutsi women, they are the ones living in the city, and then the rest are in rural areas. So when you come from Canada or US, the first person you will see is in Kigali. Maybe that's the person who's taking care of you, and then, you know, they may fall in love or whatever it is. So what I can say, Rwandans intermarrying today ethnically, it's not something new. But again, that does not mean reconciliation. No, actually, someone was saying that as well, that some Hutu kids, they don't know what happened, and their parents don't talk about it because they fear that they may be killed in exile even if they start opposing whatever the government is doing. So their kids may be doing things blindly, you see? So it's a combination of so many factors, but that does not mean reconciliation at all, at all.
Thank you. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're coming to the end of the day. You have the brochure. I hope you'll come back. We have an exciting day tomorrow. I want to thank our keynote speaker again, if we could give her a big hand of applause. I also want to thank our panelists. And I'd like to just leave you with one little thought. My husband's a theologian, so we'll stick on the concept of, we've been talking a little bit about religion, the word dialogue. When you hear that word, what is it? What do you think the etymology of that word is? Two people talking, right? But that's not it. Dialogos means through my logos, through my story. So true dialogue is when I listen to your story and you listen to mine. And in the process, we are both transformed. So this is the work that we're trying to do. We've heard each other's stories today. Come back and hear some more, and we're all going to grow a little bit wiser as a result of it. So thank you all for your participation today.